Good afternoon. I want to welcome you all to the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Santa Cruz County. I'm Russ Mink. I'm the minister serving this wonderful congregation. Today we gather to celebrate a life very well lived, the life of John Thiemann. John and his wife Jean joined this congregation on February 21st, 1993. And they both became active, supportive, and very generous members, participating in Sunday morning life, the social life, and the governing of this congregation. These days, fewer and fewer people attend church, but John just didn't attend here. He didn't just participate. He was a cornerstone of this congregation, a wise elder whose opinion was sought out and whose voice was extremely well respected. I miss him. We miss him. And this place will never be the same. But John isn't really gone. He lives in each of us as a memory, as a story. He has become part of me. And I believe he's become part of you, which is why you're here today. He was contagious with his positive outlook. his humor, and his no-nonsense way of talking. I invite you to become fully present. Take a deep breath. Get comfortable in your seat. I invite you to lay all your worries and all your burdens aside and just listen. Listen to the different stories from different perspectives about John, about this incredible man. Listen to all the different dimensions and angles of this complex human being. Listen, and you will get an even deeper appreciation of who this wonderful man was.
I told him not to make me cry before I He did a very good job. My name is Jill McGee, but I was born a Thiemann. I am the middle child of John's 5. My siblings would tell you that it shows. But they only mean that in the most loving of ways. John Walter Thiemann was born in 1924 in a small town in Illinois called Peoria. I imagine most of you here have heard about Peoria because it remained an important part of my dad's life throughout. He was one of 3 boys, the youngest, and it sounds like he had a pretty idyllic upbringing. He and the boys of Douglas Court formed the Fruit Stealers Club, which was not as nefarious as it sounded. And on Saturdays, the whole family would go to his Uncle Jack's shoe store and work there. Sundays, there was an extended family dinner. I mean, we're talking Norman Rockwell. I always believed that, and when I had a chance to go to Peoria and see it for myself, I realized it was true. This is exactly what Norman Rockwell was painting. One of the high points of growing up in Peoria was summers, of course, for any kid. Summers were spent on the farm. I don't know exactly where the farm was, someplace outside of Peoria. And I don't know exactly why it was so terrific, except that they did naughty things. But the boys spent the summer on the farm. And it made a huge impact on my dad to the point that for his retirement, he wanted the farm. And he got it. His, what I think is idyllic upbringing came to pretty much a crashing end halfway through high school when Pearl Harbor was attacked. And though they had finished high school, my brother and my father and his classmates, his brothers, all registered. They finished out their junior and senior years in high school. And get this, within 1 week of graduating from high school, my dad and all his classmates were on trains going to wherever they had been assigned. My dad had the good luck to get sent to, well, I don't know if it was good luck, Corpus Christi, Texas, where he spent the war at a Navy flight school fueling planes. He always felt I think as if he wasn't a real World War II veteran because he served stateside. But thank God he came back whole, returned to Illinois to get his degree in ceramic engineering from the University of Illinois. Does anyone know the year? No. 49. Thank you. And shortly afterwards, well, while in school, he was set up on a blind date that was with my mother. So that's how that happened. I think you all saw the wedding picture out in front. They married and in short order moved to Detroit, where David was born, Milwaukee, where Sue was born. We're talking they're having kids 2 years apart and moving. I mean, incredible. Then there was Ohio, where my brother Peter and I were born. And finally, in 1961, we moved to Palo Alto, where Todd was born. And Palo Alto was the place that my parents really put down roots. As with any time you have a whole crop of kids, the years are kind of counted by the vacations during the summer. And most of our vacations involved camping gear and a VW bus and 7 of us in it. So I was talking to a guy about this, and he was saying, yeah, weren't those the greatest times? And I said, how many kids were in your family? He said, 2. And I said, that's why I don't remember them as the greatest of times. One year we did a round trip to Peoria, 3 weeks in the VW bus with Todd. I had to bring it, I'm sorry, I'll make it. Todd in diapers. Before disposables. It was an unforgettable trip. As time went on and my parents started putting all 5 of us through college, they started thinking more and more about what they wanted, where they wanted to graduate to, what their retirement would look like. And they knew they wanted to grow things, and they'd always loved Santa Cruz County. And more, they spent weekends down here looking at different properties. And my dad would tell you that when my mom found the property with the Bartlett pear tree on it, the deal was sealed. They worked that property. First a garage, which was called an agricultural shed for the county's purposes, was built. And later the house. And during this time, they were harvesting avocados and selling them at the farmer's market. And Mom was spending summers down at the property pretty much because she didn't work during the summer. And finally, they just had to build the house because there was too much driving involved down there in Palo Alto. And you said it was 89 when they moved? They finally made the full move down there in 89. And loved it. Just loved it. My dad has his farm, and to make it all complete, Mom wanted a dog. Mom got her dog, and then it was stolen from her by my father. Dad had never had a pet, but he rapidly discovered that that dog was an ace at digging out gophers. And as we all know, gophers were the bane of his existence. So he just loved that dog. That was Kanga. He loved that dog. He took that dog to obedience training, and he and that dog were...
It didn't take.
Jerry, my husband will remember with me that once we were in the upstairs over the garage, and we saw my dad walking out with his bucket of gopher traps and a shovel, and Kanga the dog was following him, and one of the cats was following the dog. And these three sort of foggy figures were traversing the hillside. And it's just so vivid in my mind. Jerry, do you remember that? Yeah. Okay. So after the dog, my dad's first experience with a pet, there were a succession of other dogs. And he even got to kind of like the cats because he found out the cats would kill gophers and leave their little heads on the doormats. He said he always stepped on them with the arch of his foot. So life was good. My parents got to do a little bit of overseas travel as much as they wanted to, and kept planting things they liked to eat on their property. And then it got even better. I think the role that my dad was put on this earth to play was grandfather. When his grandchildren were born, he was over the moon. And there's nothing he liked better than having them out to the farm, having them work on the bees with him, having them do just about anything at all with him. Very important were rides on the tailgate of the truck, usually with the dog. Very bumpy ride. He so took to the role of grandfather that he adopted any number of people, some not even age appropriate, to play grandfather too. And just, it fed his soul. He ate it up. And after that, shortly after that, the kids weren't very old. I'm sorry, they're still kids. We lost Mom in 01? 02, January. And that was the time in my life I was most proud of my dad. He just carried on. He just kept on keeping on without a complaint and without self-pity. And it was just amazing to me. After that, I should have my brother, the doctor, come up here and give you the, let's see, there was the accident in the parking lot. Does that ring any bells with anybody? My dad at 80-something was out there with a chainsaw and not appropriate safety gear, and so that scared us to death. Apparently he didn't recognize my brothers when he got to the hospital, which was a little bit scary. So if you ever noticed the 4 big holes in his skull, when they said they were drilling 4 holes, I thought these microscopic little things. No. That's how he got those 4 holes. Then the hip, was the hip next? Got new hip. New lease on life. He'd been hobbling around for a couple of years on that bad hip. And when I finally said, what made you change your mind about getting a hip? He said, well, I didn't think they'd operate on an 88-year-old. Well, recuperating from that hip, he kept telling the care workers would ask, 1 to 10, what's your pain level? No pain. And my siblings and I were staying with him to help out during that recuperation, and the care workers would look at us like, is he nuts? He just had major surgery. And we had to explain, compared to the pain he was in, there was no pain. He put the stamp of approval on the new hip by saying, I can get back down and set a gopher trap. The only problem's getting back up. But he managed with the help of the shovel he always kept handy. And what's next, David?
David's next.
David's next.
No. Yeah. Oh, what of his? Ah, yes.
Prostate cancer.
Oh, there was the prostate cancer, yes. But a little more than a year ago, he fell in the shower and broke his pelvis. And after weeks in the hospital and in rehab, the doctor said, no more living alone and no driving. And that necessitated a move that Dad was not real happy about. And in the end, it was a degenerative lung disease that finally took him. He'd been fighting it for years. Some of you were aware that he used oxygen occasionally. But, am I correct? And that was his final cause of death. And with that, I'm going to hand you over to the guy I've been asking all these questions, my brother David.
I'm David Thiemann. I'm the oldest child. I probably should correct 1 or 2 things. Dad did grow up in this sort of halcyon, idyllic Peoria household. If anyone wants to know whether anything will play in Peoria, we can probably tell you. He was a member of the Fruit Stealers Club, which wasn't altogether benign, and it's something that he maintained throughout his life. I think there are some neighbors here who can attest that he, even at age 80 plus, believed that stolen fruit was always sweetest, and had no compunctions about stealing from both the Readers and the Lesters. I've had a lot of your orange juice, and I thank you very much. Dad was, if there is such a thing, Dad was a devout Unitarian. He came to be a Unitarian because his grandfather came over from Europe and was trying to sack out in a Catholic church, and an Irish priest rousted him out. And he vowed never to go back to that church ever again. And this was in the day when Unitarianism was really big in the Midwest. The Unitarian Church in Peoria, Illinois, seats God knows how many hundreds of people. I was astonished when I was taken there to visit. And his parents became Unitarians, and Dad became a Unitarian. It didn't really take among the children. We are, I guess, what you would call lapsed Unitarians. But he deeply believed in the mission of the church, gave God knows how many hours and God knows how much money to the church, He was sort of he believed in liberality. He was a knee-jerk liberal, and his knee sometimes would jerk and hit him in the jaw. He discovered war, however, when he discovered gophers. And so, you know, all the aggression that most men put into sports or into combat or whatever, he put into gophers, to the point where we got Dad spam, email every morning, where he would detail the exact body count of the preceding day with the method of demise of the gopher and the number of notches in his shovel. He took particular pride in certain methods that I will not go into. My father was unbelievably cheap. He was a child of depression, and he was proudly, shamelessly cheap. Some of the happier memories of my childhood, I don't know how many of you actually visited my father's shed. He was a bit of a pack rat. The amazing part of the shed, however, is that with remarkable accuracy, he could tell you where everything was. He was death on lovely tools. I gave him a very nice drill that he let the rats chew to pieces. You learn not to give him anything worthwhile. But he could always tell you where it was. It was totally uncanny. He could recall details of his childhood that I can't recall of mine. He could tell you practically every stop on the way to Hawaii, when at age 6, his father took him with his railroad pass across the country from Peoria to San Francisco to ship out to Hawaii and back. The happier memories are when his cheapness collided with reality. Dad was very enthusiastic. He was always a cheerleader. He was always sunny and optimistic. And I remember one backpack trip when I was in high school, and he had gotten some freeze-dried World War II concoction of shrimp and rice. And he cooked it up with great fanfare for me and my friends, and he was exclaiming over how wonderful this was, and we sort of looked at it, and nobody could even bear to touch it. It smelled just much. And finally, after about 5 minutes of rhapsodies, he said, "This is really awful." He said, "Throw it into the woods." Another happy moment, Dad insisted on that any ramshackle piece of junk was an adequate tool. He had an old Sears chainsaw with various parts falling off it, including frequently the chain. And he insisted that he needed nothing else, even though that it was barely a toy. It was an awful chainsaw, and I was the one who had to do most of the work with it. And so finally one Christmas, we gave Dad a steel, S-T-I-H-L for those of you who don't know, chainsaw, a really good chainsaw. And he swore up and down that it was a waste of money and that he didn't need it. And only about 10 years later did he tell me that that was a really good chainsaw. But it took him 10 years. Dad was unbelievably stubborn, and he was not above a bit of chicanery. There was a little of the entitlement of the youngest child with Dad, including the statute of limitations, I think, is expiring. So there were various tax schemes that he tried to involve his children in. He would drive down the middle of Mount Madonna Road, which runs up through the park and is barely wide enough for one car, let alone two, and would insist that everyone else would get out of the way. Driving with him was a bit of a white-knuckle freight. And it turns out that this accident in the parking lot, he collected workman's comp. I only found this out yesterday. Dad had a lot of achievements. He was president of 2 church congregations, both in Palo Alto and here. He served on the county grand jury. He got 5 kids through college, and none of them got to jail. There were some narrow scrapes, but we seem to have done okay. But I guess what I'll remember most is his generosity. He was always there with the loan. Whenever you visited him, there was always orange juice for breakfast that was freshly squeezed. He was just an unbelievably sweet, generous guy.
Todd Thiemann. I'm the youngest of the 5 Thiemann children. And I wanted to talk for a bit about John Thiemann. Dovetailing on what my brother David highlighted and sort of touching on it, he was a very simple, practical guy, and that sort of ran the family. We had the great-great-grandfather who came across from Germany and was Catholic, and when you're in trouble, impoverished, and you're Catholic, you go to the church, and he went to this church in, I believe it was Chicago, this is what my father told me, and got thrown out by the Irish beadle who said, "Get out of here, you dirty German," because the Irish and the Germans back then were not so keen on each other. And he said, "Fine." Practical guy that he was, this is my great-great-grandfather, I'm never going back to that church. And actually, this is something that he told me, and I don't know how much of it is embellishment, but there's a little interlude before arriving at the Unitarian church, where I think they went to the Presbyterian church, a Protestant denomination. And this is our great-great-grandfather who was down in the boiler room with the maintenance guy smoking cigars and playing poker when the pastor came down and said, "You're going to roast in hell for being in the church and playing poker and smoking." He said, "Fine." Done with that, and landed in the Unitarian church. Very practical family, and John Thiemann had that certain element of practicality, and that could be, because he never an extravagant guy. He chose to have his orchard rather than maybe retire on a golf course or have a beach house. You know, he wanted to work. He and my mom wanted to work. He enjoyed marching up and down that orchard, hunting gophers, as you have heard. He had a certain element of frugality there. You could call it cheapness, frugality. Driving that same broken down truck that we all thought was a death trap for God knows how many years. You probably saw it out in the parking lot. And but he was also adaptable in that here's a guy who was in his 80s, 90, 91, and he picked up email and he was proficient with the computer. So he even in, as things went on, he was still nimble of mind in that way. To echo one of the things that David drew out, my father was generous, but it was sort of a generosity in action. It wasn't a passive generosity. It was generosity going out and cutting down tree limbs and nearly getting killed in the parking lot here. It was putting 5 kids through college. It was also little things like giving blood. He was really very diligent, always about giving blood, and that's something I picked up through the years. I saw him, and then that was my model. So that's something I give as well as giving time. And one of the things we learned is if you got my father tipsy, he would start throwing out money, which is something we make in the holidays. But one of the things that also is that you probably recognize is my father was very unconventional. He was a beekeeper in Palo Alto. That's where he picked it up, where he had beehives on the roof of our house in the backyard, and then he had those in Watsonville. I was quite keen on that until catching a swarm with my father, and a couple of bees got inside my bonnet and stung me, and then I decided, that's not for me. He also brewed beer in our garage, and that was an adventure, especially when bottles started exploding. But that didn't faze him. He enjoyed brewing beer. Buying a second oven to stick in the garage to make beef jerky. So this was a guy who could have been a hippie if he had been born a decade or two later. He wanted to do he wanted to carve his own path, backpacking in the Sierras rather than going to Disneyland. And one thing that I recall from my childhood that it took me years to understand when I was a teenager, I joined the football team at my local high school, and we had this meeting where all the parents of football players came together, and there were a bunch of people there, all the businessmen in their suits, and I knew my father, he was going to come to this meeting. He was actually, you might recall him as a farmer having an orchard in Watsonville. He was a Silicon Valley sales guy. He was a Silicon Valley engineer, ceramic engineer for most of his working life. And I was expecting my father to show up in suit and tie and what have you, like all the other dads out there. well, my father showed up in a red Pendleton and overalls because I think he'd just come back from the orchard. And at the time I was mortified, but as the years went on, it made me appreciate that here was a man that did sort of carved his own path, went his own way, and really enjoyed those 91 years of life.
Hello, my name is Anna. I'm John's granddaughter. I'm just going to share some of my favorite memories of my grandpa because, as Phil said, the best role he played, in my opinion, was grandfather. In elementary school, the best days were when my grandpa picked me up from school. I could hear the rumbling engine of this rickety blue truck from a mile away, so I checked myself out after as quick as I could and jumped in, even if I needed a step from my grandfather at first when I was really young. The truck always had the same dusty yet familiar smell. The brush, leaves, and sometimes macadamia nuts, and the occasional avocado would roll around on the floor as we rumbled our way down Empire Grade. All the windows rolled down. On these car rides, I told my grandpa about my friends and my art projects, the Roman soldiers and my history lesson, and that although I found many worms in the school garden that day, sadly, there were no gophers. My grandpa was the best person to hang out with during family events. Every Thanksgiving, Christmas, and Easter, he could always tell how bored my brother and I were with no other kids to play with, while my aunts and uncles rambled on about politics. He would sneakily grab a pad of paper and pen and start a game of tic-tac-toe or dots while my aunts and uncles talked. I somehow always managed to win these games. My Grandpa T would just grin his toothy grin and say, "I don't know how you do it." To me, my grandpa was always happy and always looked on the sunny side of life. He never went anywhere without his big smile and a bag of avocados. Every soccer game, I could count on him being there early with his fold-out chair to cheer me on. Every orchestra concert, he sat in the front row. He never missed Grandparents' Day at school, and he never missed a birthday. I remember at Grandparents' Day, all the other kids would want to show off their new shoes or their new bikes, but I just wanted to show off my grandpa. Every February, I would wait for my card in the mail, where he would write, "Will you be my Valentine?" My grandpa taught me to make the freshest orange juice you'll ever taste. He also taught me you can make scones out of whatever's in the fridge, regardless of the expiration date. He built me a treehouse, and he taught me to be an avocado picking tree climbing monkey. He taught me how to crack a macadamia nuts open with a hammer that, in retrospect, was bigger than I was. He built my brother a potato cannon that made him the coolest kid in school. You could hear the booms from hillsides away. He taught me to grow vegetables and harvest honey, and I remember he would sit on the garage floor with me as I would try and eat a whole bottle of honey by myself. He always had so many stories to tell. He had the best memory. Even if he retold the blind man and the elephant, his favorite story, if you know him. A few too many shines. I loved him. He was the best grandfather I could imagine.
Hi, I'm Bill Faustman. I'm Sue Thiemann's husband, John's son-in-law. And my day job is as a clinical psychologist, so I think I can comment on a few of his he had many names. I'm not sure whether you knew them all. I recall, and I checked it out with Sue today, he had a nickname from his youth as Tiny. When he was a football player in high school, I presume, he was a big guy, but he was called Tiny. He's also called T, probably by many people, Jack by some. I think, Peter, you termed him the old one, and that kind of stuck in recent years. And he was also, among the family at least, often referred to as the old Indian, this kind of man of the earth. Sue tells me you came up with that term. Is that true? Yes. Bruce Larson.
Backpacking.
Maybe,
You did.
maybe. I don't recall, but
Okay, so Bruce.
it's appropriate.
Okay. I mean, he came up with that because he was this kind of Yul Gibbons guy. You might remember the ads from the 1970s or so when Yul Gibbons would advertise for grape nuts and get up and say, "Ever eat a pine tree? Many parts are edible." You know, it was sort of like the expectee to say something like that. Walking around the orchard, God knows he'd say something like that. You know, he was more than a bit eccentric, and you know, sometimes eccentricity can be funny, and sometimes it can be downright dangerous. We've heard about the funny parts of it already, the daily emails, the absolute clinical obsession with gophers. Unbeknownst to many, he's also a hoarder. We can talk about that later if you want. I won't go into that, but we would get the daily body count in the email that David talked about. You know, and some people go like deep sea fishing and take pictures of themselves with marlins and things like that, giant tunas. There actually are many photographs of him with large gophers that he is especially proud of, and you know, he so loved that orchard and so loved killing the gophers. When he got kind of a little out of breath in the last couple of years, he used to have picking parties in the fall. He wasn't so able to go out and set up ladders and run around the orchard with everybody. But again, I remember the most joyous time about 2 years ago, and it was about the happiest I ever saw him, was that he could like combine a party with him in that rickety old 4x pickup truck, putting all the people in the back, and driving full speed across the orchard, everybody flying around from tree to tree, and we'd drive right under the tree, and then he'd smile, and as he watched, everybody picked the avocados. Actually, it's not avocados, it was apples and pears. And he'd drive to the next tree, and everybody would like have the most wonderful time. That was the happiest I'd seen him in the last 10 years. Now on to the dangerous things. John Thiemann never should have been allowed around electrical repair work. And I warned this gathering that if any of you ever allowed him to do electrical repair, I would immediately have him inspected, whether it's in this building, at your home. And that's based on an observation that David and I found a couple of years ago. We live in the house that John and Jean lived in from 1960 odd to 1989. I'm still finding things. And this was a case where in my kitchen, the large electrical stovetop, we have an electric stovetop, I noticed one time I touched it and I said, that just shocked me. But I thought it was a hallucination. It was one of those things like, no, that couldn't happen. So I touched it again and damn it was shocking me. And David was there and we said, and I said, David, touch that. It's like, oh my God, it's like, yeah, it's hot, electrically. And so we said, let's take it apart. We took it apart and we got into the wiring. And we found what John Thiemann had done in 1965 or sometime. He'd taken two electrical wires and put them together with a Band-Aid. An actual Band-Aid. And this 50-year-old Band-Aid had finally shorted out and electrified the entire stovetop. Oh my God. So, you know, he was also, though, a guy in the orchard, a man in the earth, and all that business, but he was really also open to new experiences. And Sue and I took him to Europe 3 times, actually, including one time we took him a couple months after Jean died. And we kind of viewed that as maybe sort of a therapeutic sort of thing, hoping to get him a little out of the orchard and out and do something. I'll tell you, you know, him and pastis. In Provence, there's this most wonderful town. I won't pronounce the name. You can ask me afterwards. If I pronounce the name, my wife would cringe and say, don't try to speak French. But there's this most wonderful little village outside of Le Beau with the world's most perfect square, the world's most perfect church, plane trees, a bar in the square with tables set around the most gorgeous fountain, the colors of, you know, Cézanne. And he went up to Sue, and we had plenty of free time, and he said, you guys go off and do your own thing. Remember, John was, so he said to Sue, like, how do you say in French, 1 pastis, please? And so told him, and he would spend the afternoons in the bar, on the tables, and we'd sit up in our hotel room and watch him. He had the most wonderful time, spending hours, literally away hours in a bar in rural France drinking pasties. Once you take him off the farm, they see the wilds of France. And that was just a wonderful memory. He loved Roman history. I think you mentioned that, Anna. And I must say, if you're taking him around Europe, and if I had $5 for every time he said, "Man, those Romans could do stuff," it was, it was like, he was always blown away by Roman history. Clinically, this is a guy who had no anxiety. What did he worry about? I can't remember ever him being anxious or worried or concerned. He was generous and kind and extroverted. Was it growing up during the Depression that gave him a little bit of perspective on life? Was it a little bit of neurochemistry? Was it that Midwestern toughness that, partially makes this country great? He died on a Saturday afternoon, and quite remarkably, Sue and I got an email from him the preceding Sunday, so this would be 6 days before he died. An absolutely out of context 2-line email saying, "I've had a wonderful life. Thank you." It was quite amazing, and he was nobody told him he was terminally ill at that point. He was not doing well in terms of his breathing, but nobody had any idea he had 6 days to live. He was at the VA that Wednesday, admitted to the ER, and died at the VA Saturday afternoon. But that was just an amazing email. It makes me think of something Mark Twain once said, which was, "The fear of death follows from the fear of life. And a man who lives slowly is prepared to die at any time." And he really did seem to let go, and didn't seem anxious, didn't seem to have any regrets, didn't seem to have any despair. Something I don't see very often much of anybody. So for us, in saying goodbye, we can say that yes, it was a life well lived. It was a life of really giving to others, to this fellowship and congregation. A life of some dangerous eccentricities and some wonderful ones. If there's an afterlife in some alternative universe, God knows out there somewhere, one can certainly be sure that the gophers there are really scared.
Hello, I'm Bruce Larson, old family friend of the Thiemanns, my wife Robin, and
we're here as a pair. Actually a trio, because our daughter Sophie, who is one of the many kids, I'm sure John think of John as a extra grandpa, sent a letter from where she is.
right. I think I met John and the Thiemann family at a Unitarian church, so we're kind of coming full circle. 50 years ago in Palo Alto, and befriended David because we were in the same class, and we had kind of a parallel family. We also had a VW bus. We had 6 kids; they had 5, but we also did family vacations the same way the Thiemanns did, and had kind of parallel lives. But I think it was John and the family that took me first time backpacking, because our family did car camping, but backpacking, carrying your own stuff, that was a Thiemann thing. And we went to Hetch Hetchy and the fabulous story of there's a Todd over the fall. He didn't go there, but anyway, that was a big adventure, and I'm backpacking to this day, so that's something that John I thank for. And what else? The Thiemanns were they very welcoming, and I remember pies at their house, fun to visit. They hired me and David, together we painted their house, and John over the years had me make things for him, and actually all the Thiemann children I've done little projects for, so that's always been satisfying. And later in life, I have a wood shop and generate a lot of sawdust. So we came across this, I think the best deal I've ever had is I would trade sawdust for avocados. It's a great deal. So I got to see John on a regular basis when I had surplus sawdust, and that was always fun. And we both thought we were getting a great deal. So. And later, our daughter, maybe you could read the story, but our daughter Sophie kind of hooked up with John, and he introduced her. Maybe you should read the story.
Well, one of the things, well, John was always incredibly generous, but, with woodworking, did I knock it off?
No,
Well, with woodworking, self-employment kind of comes and goes. And I remember during one of these times, John commissioned probably the most expensive wastebasket. Beautifully made wooden wastebasket during one of those slow times, for which I will always be grateful. Before I read Sophie's letter, I just wanted my memory is that while John kept bees, there was always a collection of glass jars of various sizes and provenance, partially filled with honey. There was no escaping a jar of honey. You would go up to the orchard, and even if you didn't take one, there would be one in your car. We'd find them on our porch. We always had so much honey, and then one day the hives failed, and there wasn't any more honey, but we had a stash, and bit by bit it went away. And then over the last few years, people will say, "Oh, could I have some honey for my tea?" And I go to the cupboard, and there's no more honey. And I always feel a little surprised and a little sad, and that's kind of how I feel about John's passing. I'm a little surprised, definitely sad. No, I will miss him. But here's Sophie, who's now 23 and living in Vermont, and she sent this last night by email. John had more than 20 mature avocado trees in his orchard, and twice a year, if it was a good season, they would be laden with hundreds of fruits. He'd used to sell some at farmers markets, but always had cardboard boxes full of avocados and other harvested fruits and veggies placed strategically in the carport, so that his guests would not escape his edible parting gifts on their way out. And John had many, many guests. So many that my parents and I used to joke that John Thiemann had more of a social life than all of us combined. I have early memories of driving with my parents up the steep and windy road to visit him on the farm, always eager to see what was ready for picking that day. When we would pull into the driveway, John's current dog would come bounding over to say hello, while John was either outside working or inside napping. He would greet us with a big smile and a warmth so genuine and so kind, and this is just such a great picture. It's just so good. That's exactly what he was like. We would go inside where John would offer us a small round bottle of Martinelli's apple juice and hear about the latest activities on the orchard, never missing the customary gopher catch report. A tour of the farm and more chatting would follow, concluding with a box heaped with citrus fruits, veggies, and, you guessed it, avocados. I cherished these visits with John as a kid, and as I grew older, I became more interested in hearing about the farming side of all that bounty. John was pleased by my interest and quickly put me to work. I hold a vivid and dear memory of the first time John showed me how to pick avocados. I remember him hoisting the strap of a huge harvest satchel around my neck, handing me one of his 2 picking poles and telling me to climb in the back of his pickup truck. It's time to harvest. John walked me through the grove, pointing and explaining the different varieties and growth cycles of the trees. He was a good teacher. He then demonstrated the arduous but fun process of removing the fruit, and instantly I was hooked. Actually, she was about 12, and when I picked her up that day in the car, she turned to me and said, "Can you make a career out of picking avocados?" We spent that day and many more filling up the bed of his truck with hard green avocados destined for the kitchen of visiting friends. Over the years, John became a good friend, and the orchard became a very special place to me. On breaks from college, I made sure to visit John because I loved our time together in the dirt. After working in the sun, John would invite me back for the same Martinellis of my childhood, but for a different conversation. We would talk about everything from capitalism to what it means to follow your passion, just like two old friends relaxing after a hard day's work. These are the memories I cherish most about my friendship with John, and I miss him dearly. I will always love, admire, and remember my friend John Thiemann and the life he created on Old Hazeldale.
Good afternoon. I'm Ivan Denzel. Bill, you described from your clinical psychologist perspective some of the qualities that John had as a psychiatrist. I'll second all those descriptions. On the program here, the celebration of life, the words enthusiastic and optimistic are used. Other words refer to it as generous. I like to think of the Scout law that talks about kind of being trustworthy, helpful, friendly, loyal. All of those apply to John so well. And the other term that was used, man of the earth, and I'd like to speak to that term. So when you asked Todd if I'd come and say words, I promised 2 episodes, no more, but they fit in so well. First met John about 1970, maybe a little earlier. My 2 children were approximately 3 and 4, 4 and 5. We all lived in those Eiglers in South Palo Alto. We walked back and forth to the Eigler swimming pool and tennis. And I passed by John's house, didn't know John, knew many of the people in the neighborhood. But one day, there is John painting the house a particular shade of electric blue, very, very distinct color. And the kids are entranced by this fellow who's doing this work. He invites us in, and before you know it, I'm painting the house. Had to go home to get rid of the kids, but I came back. I didn't have an apple to give him, but he allowed me to continue painting the house. And my memory is I came back several days thereafter to continue in that project. But what was it that I found so attractive? It was really John's openness, enthusiasm, friendliness, all the qualities that made him this very special person that he was. So in the ensuing years, we remained friends, and oddly enough, several years later, approximately 1977, John became involved with Tom in the Boy Scouts, and I had been very involved with the Boy Scouts up to that point, and subsequently. So John did become Scoutmaster for a while, and he, if you think of the word scouting, an important part of that is the outing in scouting. So our troop went on outings relentlessly. And many of these were short trips around town, but some of them were excursions to Oregon, Washington, Idaho, Wyoming, all over the Sierra. And in addition to the small backpack trips, we had the 50-miler backpack trip, where we'd be out for about 9 days plus travel time, and really plan an event and do some pretty major backpacking. I don't recall the specific trips that John went on, but what I absolutely remember is here's this fairly large, husky, healthy guy, most of us work very, very hard to try to get our pack down to 35 pounds or less. John was proud his pack would be 50 pounds, and if he loaded it up with some extra food, it maybe approach 60. He was a large, strong guy, very comfortable in the outdoors, and as good as could be in terms of setting the example of all the scout qualities. One specific one is this: if you've been walking for many hours, hot day, heavy pack, then you get kind of tired, grumpy, and if there's a rock in the path, it's too much work to step over it, so you go around it. And if there should be some litter in the path, I mean, that doesn't concern you, but it did concern John. I never knew him not to stop and bend over with a heavy pack to pick up the litter and put it in his litter bag. The phrase, wrote that down, a man of the earth. He revered it in all ways. It was that sort of a quality that I think he passed on, and those qualities that we've heard here today. Very special guy. I'm pleased to be able to be part of this celebration. Thank you.
Hello. My name is Dennis Frieder. My wife Karen is here today as well. Back in 1971, we purchased our Corvus acreage, and eventually John and Jean purchased an adjacent parcel in a long boundary in common. They built their retirement home there, and so for many, many years we were close neighbors. They would keep us informed of what their children were doing, and they watched our young children grow up to be adults. And in fact, John came to know our grandchildren. Our homes weren't so far apart, it was a short walk, and so immediately, as soon as the Thiemanns arrived at that property, John proceeded with one of his absolute great pleasures in life, and that is sharing his fruits and vegetables that he raised on his, what he called his farm over there. And I know a good number of you were also recipients of that sharing, I'm sure. He would come walking over unannounced to our front door, toting a couple of bags full of whatever was in season. We would talk for a bit about the politics of the day, most of which didn't suit either one of us. We get it all straightened out before we were through. And he'd end by saying, "Now you come over next time, come right into the garden anytime, pick whatever you want." I guess we were a little slow to do that or something, because before too long, there he was back at the front door again with 2 more sacks full of goodies. My wife is particularly fond of avocados, and they did have that avocado orchard over there. I'm guessing that over the decades, she probably consumed 300 or 400 pounds of guacamole. Okay, a bit of an exaggeration, but you get the idea. John, as you may have figured out, was a sort of peacenik, a pacifist. You could tell that from just looking at the bumper stickers plastered all over his old Toyota pickup. You could make him out there among the various dents and scrapes.
They held that truck together.
Yeah, they did. That's a good point. And you knew his politics. But I'm going to corroborate some stories that you've heard already here. Because although it may have been something of a peacenik, there was a battlefield when he was an unremitting warrior. Heartless. We would get these phone calls now and then. Later on it'd be an email. Or he'd come over in person and very proudly report that That morning he caught an 8-incher. Yeah, he taped out the big ones and kept the record. I think 9-incher. I think his all-time record was 9.5 inches, counting the tail, as he always pointed out. When Gene passed away, I knew it wasn't always that easy on over there, but he soldiered on because he was that kind of a guy. And I know he got even greater satisfaction and purpose out of working his farm and sharing his produce with others. As he advanced into what we call being elderly, I would go over on occasion to check him out, because it takes a lot of hard physical work to keep up with this kind of country property, right? And I admit to a bit of an ulterior motive, because I was beginning to ask myself, hey, how long can I keep this up on my own place? And I thank John for giving me confidence by his example that I was going to be in there for quite a long time. There he'd be, age 88, still tumbling these heavy bales of straw off the back of his pickup and donating some to us, by the way. You know, my judgment of John never varied through all the years. I found him to be an honest gentleman who was never afraid to stop along the county road and pick up other people's trash. I found him to be just a darn decent fellow. And by my way of looking at things, being a decent person ranks right up there in the human virtues. Sometimes when we'd be parting company, he'd say something like, yeah, you're the best neighbor I could ever hope for. Now, that was typical of John, very, very gracious. But of course, he was missing the main point, and that is that John was the best neighbor.
I'm a little tippy. I'm on the wait list for hip replacement myself. My name's Sylvia Forsyth, and I'm honored to be the representative from this fellowship in Aptos in Santa Cruz County. John and Jean Thiemann moved from Palo Alto, as you've heard, about the same year, 89, that I returned to Santa Cruz after raising my family in Los Angeles and at the beach. So I have not known this fellowship without John Thiemann and Jean originally. John's energy, caring spirit for the church came in many different forms. As you've heard, facilities was a big part, much to his uncomfortableness after falling out of a tree with a chainsaw in his hand. Being on the board, having chairmanship of many different committees, and quite involved with our finance committee. Sharing tons of avocados and lemons and truck farm things and honey, as all of you have, I hear say, expressed how wonderful that was. And to me that showed his love and his commitment to the human race and to this, we call today, beloved community. When John and Jean came to live here, they re-energized the Funeral Consumers Alliance of Monterey Bay, which used to be called the Monterey Memorial or Funeral Society. John was president for many years, and if you avoided having him give you a sales pitch for planning your future, I put some brochures on it and several snapshots of one with John in the hospital. And when our national president came back in this room to speak with us last year at a local meeting, John got the biggest kick out of hearing the national president, because his main job as director of the Funeral Consumers Alliance for America is to make light of it. This is gonna happen to all of us. So he has many funny stories to tell about turning fear into something that's human. It's gonna happen to all of us. Personally, John, Jane Boone, myself, and Bob Kraft, who we lost last year, had many wonderful meals together and bottles of wine, generally thanks to Bob Kraft, who was quite a connoisseur of wines. When you're aging, these kinds of friendships are irreplaceable. And I thank Jane and John and Bob for sharing that love, and for myself and for humanity, as I said. We love this place. Tomorrow after church, we're going to plant a memorial lemon tree over here. We have one, but it doesn't bear fruit where it is, so we're going to call this little lemon tree. It's going to be by the totems in our yard there when you go out, and we'll call it John.
Last but not least, my name is Walt Thiemann. It's an honor to know. I call him Uncle Jack. I see that he's had a lot of other names over the years, and his wife Jean. Jack was a truly genuine individual whose exemplary character is a role model for me and others that knew him. The success of his children and their qualities are credit to his and Jean's guidance. I admire his ability to succeed in business and then become self-sufficient and active living alone at the orchard. I really have enjoyed hearing the stories that everybody else had, and certainly remiss that, haven't been to California that many times in the last 30, 40 years. So my stories, go back to his days when he was in Ohio, Detroit, whenever. Recollection in the early years in the Midwest. Jack was my dad's youngest brother. He was 6 years younger with brother Bob halfway between them. All three of them represented what Dan Rather referred to as the greatest generation. They were all in the military during World War II. Bill and Jack served in the Navy and Bob in the Merchant Marines. All were charismatic and loved being around people, especially their grandchildren. Bill and Jack had similar backgrounds growing up in Peoria, Illinois, and graduating from the University of Illinois, where they obtained their degrees in ceramical engineering. My first recollection of Jack was when he lived in Orrville, Ohio, when he worked for, I think it was Smuckers. I remember his backyard as an open field that had no end in sight. It was Never Land out there. When my sister Jan and I were about 12, Jack and Jean took us for a bike ride in southern Indiana. That I vividly remember. We stayed in hostels, which was not the type of living experience I had been exposed to. I always had a bed and whatever, but he believed in the rough living. I know later on he stayed in elder hostels over in Europe, he talked to me about. We saw the limestone quarries and covered bridges in Brown County. This was actually a trade, Jack and Jean took my sister Jan and I were about 11 or 12 at that time, and David and Sue, I think, were probably about 4 or 5 at the time. My mom agreed to take care of the two of them and up to her place in Michigan while we were biking down in southern Indiana. Another trade happened a few years later. My other sister Martha came to Palo Alto for about 6 weeks, while Jill came to Michigan for 6 weeks to stay at our summer cottage. Interesting experience for both. More recently, I remember Jack visiting me in Detroit in 1991 when my twins were just 3 days old. Enjoyed him talking about the days when he lived in Detroit, which is a far different area than Motor City. He had lived there before the riots in Detroit, which was kind of the bridging point between, you know, good times and not so good times to the Motor City. Still more recently, though a dozen years back, my twins Will and Allie and I visited Jack at his orchard. He seemed to be so at home here and enjoyed showing off his avocado trees and beehives. Yeah, I remember Jack taking us to an authentic Mexican restaurant in Watsonville where no English was spoken. We tried to go to an upscale restaurant, but the waiting line was too long, so. Jack got along fine with these people as they were, when we began, customers of his. He explained to me how he peddled avocados through the Mexican restaurants in Watsonville. My last visit with him was a phone conversation about Germany, just prior to my trip going to Germany in January. He was excited to tell me about Freiburg and relatives there. He was so pleased that he was going to this part of Germany. I was pleased he was so articulate at this later stage of his life, and certainly appreciated the information he passed along. Jack is a great man. I appreciate the opportunity to be part of this celebration, getting to know him. I know that we're all better off to have been exposed to this charming individual. My thoughts are especially with his children and grandchildren at this time of remembrance. As I said, I wish I had spent more time in California hearing these stories. I did get his daily emails, which, you know, was always uplifting, and I was glad when he felt happy about knocking off the last gopher. So, anyway, great man, great to be here. Thank you.
None of us knows when we're going to die or how. But we know that this life is finite and will end. And that's what makes living so incredibly precious. That's what makes our relationship with each other so precious. And our relationship with each other so important. And that's what makes knowing someone like John so inspirational. What an amazing friend, neighbor, uncle, grandfather, father. What an amazing person we have lost. But then again, he isn't gone. Not so long as he lives on in our memories. John's not gone, he's just taken on a different state. And he's inside of us now. Hold him tightly. Celebrate the changes that he brought to this world and the inspiration that he brought to all of us. You want to use this one or not? I think it's working.
So we get a little higher. You want to hold it? Got the minister on this first, pretty good. Thanks, Russ. Okay. What a great family. I just hope the 5 kids decide to become Unitarians, because they're all great. And by the way, John never shared with us, at least me anyway, his passion for killing gophers. So that was the one aspect I never heard. I killed 43 gophers last year. I'm not proud of it. Anyway, I wrote this song about 10 years ago when, maybe more 13 years ago now, Gene passed away. Gene and Beth and Gene and Barney were 3 members here. And in the song I referred to Nikolai who we heard from a little bit earlier, who's about 3 months, or 2 months old. 2 months old. Can you hear my words? Because this is a word song. The flame of life in a mighty redwood flickered out after 2,000 years. That very moment, a tiny sapling pushed past the leaf and saw the world first appear. The flame of life is a beautiful circle. That flame of life is in us all. You are my brother, you are my sister, you are my mother, my father, my child. Our dear friend John, you've just now left us, but you're with us in our hearts in this hall. Look around, there's a lovely baby. When you hear its cry, perhaps that's your sweet call. The flame of life in a mighty redwood, it flickered out after 2,000 years. That very moment, a tiny sapling pushed past the leaf and saw the world first appear. As we light our chalice, one thought consoles us, even though in our hearts we all still mourn. We are one family, we need each other. Those before, those here now, those to be born. We've just been blessed with a beautiful baby, and Nikolai is his sweet name. That empty chair there tells the story, one departed, now I hope that flame of life, mighty redwood, flickered out after 2,000 years. That very moment, tiny sapling pushed past the leaf, saw the world first appear.
I invite you to continue to be here and join the family for conversations. We're going to have light snacks out on the patio through these doors. And I invite each of you to seek out someone you do not know and share the story of John Thiemann. May his name always be spoken. Amen and blessed be.